My name is Joe Stadolnik. I teach in the college and in the English department.
My name is Valerie Levan. I teach in the college in the humanities core.
My name is Itamar Francis. I teach in the college and in the Department of Linguistics.
I'm Yangti Li Yongdi. I teach Chinese archaeology in East Asian languages and civilizations.
In reading cultures, we are a sequence that's interested in cultural formation. And we're interested in the way that individual works of art can act as both kind of repositories of understandings of culture and that have a shaping power for the way that, that cultures conceive of themselves and are perceived by others. Kind of one aspect of what happens in the course of this course is that it cultivates a certain maybe capacity for cosmopolitanism in terms of like at-homeness in the world. Like I have as one of my learning goals for students to be able to find their way in the world of an unfamiliar text. And I think that that is in many ways sort of analogous with being able to find your way in a number of different contexts. So I hope that it will be useful in that way as well.
Yeah, and that you mentioned that so many students come to our sequence to reading cultures because the kind of global scope of it appeals to them, and we want them to come with that enthusiasm, but also realize that the cultures that they're going to be reading aren't these kind of inert, they're not inert texts that we are going to pin down and come to know completely, but instead we're going to learn how to think along with them and kind of think about their world and think about these bigger questions along with Ovid, along with Zordil Hurston, and that it's a much more dynamic, cultures are much more dynamic objects than a museum piece that's just sitting on the table waiting to be studied.
Yes. And texts are not straightforwardly to be taken as representations, or authors are not necessarily representing a culture. So that's another thing that I think they already see in Ovid, right? Yeah. Yes, it is a very much Roman text, but it is positioning itself vis-a-vis the contemporary culture in non-straightforward ways.
I mean, so we can say something too about the general structural organization of reading cultures, which is thematically organized. So in contrast to readings in world literature, which is organized by genre. So we have these themes of collecting, travel, and exchange. And I would say really that the theme of collecting is the overarching one that kind of goes through all three of the quarters. And one of the things that we're thinking about, not only translation as a way that allows works of art to continue to have significance in different contexts, but also just, what are some forces that might be at play in preserving some of the things that we begin with, like Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is an ancient work, and works of the Middle Ages, right? So what is involved in keeping them present for us? What happens, not only in translating Ovid's Metamorphoses for our time, but translating it to a Renaissance work of art, like the one that we have behind us. So like, what did it mean in those contexts? I think those are things that we begin to talk about doing in the autumn quarter, and then we kind of continue on with into travel and into exchange.
So the autumn quarter is really focused on collecting and collection as a kind of cultural practice, and it's organized chronologically, from antiquity to I guess the American 30s, 40s, but it also moves, at least the way that I like to think about it is that it moves between different modes of collecting, from Ovid, who's collecting ancient myth, but doing it as an act of literary production and as a poet, to then a radically different authorless text that is about collection, basically as cultural anthologizing, with the Arabian Nights, where the different parts of the text that make it up come from a vast temporal and geographical range. and have been curated by somebody later on, and raise all these issues of authorship. So there we're talking about collective collection.
I guess I think about the transition from, so I normally teach in autumn and in winter. What I think about the transition is that in autumn quarter, we're thinking about works as partaking in this process of cultural formation in a very inward-looking sort of way. So I think that that is one thing, despite the differences that all of the authors have in common, is that they're mostly kind of looking at their own culture and thinking about it. Zora Neale Hurston is very conscious that she's presenting her culture to an outside culture, which is not a consideration in Arabian Nights or in Strange Tales, or really in Ovid so much either, despite the kind of plurality of the Roman Empire. But then when we move into winter quarter, it is all about encounters with others, right? And
yeah, I think that's a topic that hits home for many students, especially first freshmen. They usually travel away from home to come to Chicago. Even for Chicago residents, they still leave home and stay on campus. So in many ways, they can find connections with the text, the encountering, the strangeness, the challenges for being away, travel versus home. So there's always a contrast between being safe at home and then traveling and then maybe returning home or not returning home. So there are many things that can make people think hard about travel in that sense. And the texts are so rich and so encompassing. So there are many things to think about when they read the text.
In the spring quarter, my goal is to invite students into the process of humanities research and what that looks like. And I invite them to, by the end of the quarter, collaborate on a research project in Special Collections Research Center in this really unique archive of an Indian filmmaker named Mrinal Sen. But the structure of the quarter itself, or the theme, the overarching theme, is the theme of exchange. And we're reading books and watching films that are being made during these times of radical economic reorganization. And we also tend to read texts and films that are coming of age films in some ways. A young person who's born under one system and then finds himself living in and trying to strive to succeed in a new system. And I think this also speaks to what students themselves feel in college. And so we move from the literary to the visual, and so yeah, that's spring. That's what I do in spring.
Just going to say one of the skills, habits of mind that I think students pick up in this class very well is, especially when reading literature or looking at works of art, is moving from evaluation, which is what we immediately do when we encounter a work of art, to analysis. So it relates to the slowing down, paying a lot more attention to detail, and I think an amazing realization that one has in a first class like this is that interpretation, which is really ultimately what you learn how to do in this class, is very open-ended, and that it is completely fine and interesting to do what they sometimes call make stuff up, right? When you encounter a text, that it can be a very productive and illuminating process.
I think after teaching this course a few times, I realized the text we are offering them can be very challenging for the students, especially straight coming out of high school. And we are doing stories that are not your typical narrative. You can't just follow the timeline and understand everything. It's jumping around, it's presenting different stories, and students really need to slow down. I tell them, you have to slow down, even for instance, a small places like this thick. But I want them to slow down and not read it over dinner, for instance. They have to pay attention to the details. I think that's really good exercise for the students.
we also ask students to read the physical books. And many instructors have device-free classrooms as an effort to help students to slow down, to really focus on the work that we're doing together in conversation.
I think the kind of student who has the most fun in this class is a student who enjoys encountering the strange and unknown and facing a difficult text and figuring out, what am I going to do with this? And starting off with the notion that there's nothing you can do with it and that you don't know how to respond to it, and slowly finding ways to say something and think something more enjoyable and interesting than I liked it or I didn't like it.
I think it's really fun to see students being challenged. They're so used to the internet culture now, Instagram, TikTok, everything is a straight line. And when they face these texts, they get so puzzled. But that's the fun part. It's challenging and make them think. They may feel frustrated during discussion, but they walk away thinking more. And I think that's really fun. And I have students coming up afterwards saying that it was a wonderful quarter. They got something out of it. But it can be challenging.
I think the very notion and also the experience of realizing that you can move from an ancient Roman text to a medieval Middle Eastern text to Chinese 17th century text to a contemporary American text, and it all somehow falls into a continuous discussion that builds on recurring observations and modes of thinking is also very rewarding for both me and the students.